Hey there, guys. Thank you for hanging out with me once again, and welcome to another Holy Shed. I appreciate your time. Speaking of which, we are now in a time, aren't we, called Lent, which I confess always seems quite a long stretch of time, actually. And, well, it is 6 weeks, intended to mirror the 40 days and 40 nights of Jesus, spending that time being tempted in the wilderness, or as I would see it, sorting out his priorities before launching into his life mission. And I kind of like it that Lent drags on a bit because if we ourselves are doing any sort of personal reflection during this period, Lent isn't a quick shufty, is it? There's time to do some thinking, to do some reading or walking or whatever that we may not normally do. A bit of personal contemplation, which, especially for those of us in the north here, during springtime is a pretty good thing to do, I reckon. Now, here in the shed, we are taking a shufti at my book, How to Be a Bad Christian and a Better Human Being. And the idea to do this was prompted by our home church in South London deciding to make this the Lent book. So I'm having parallel sessions to those with that we're having here in the shed with folk in the church during each week, which is, it's going good. For today, I asked you to read chapters 4, 5, and 6. So approximately doing 3 chapters a week, though it won't be exactly like that. But 4, 5, and 6, which I hope you've had chance to take a look at. But if not, no matter. In a way, these chapters are linked by the subject matter of the first of those 3, chapter 4, which is entitled It's Not About the Rules, How to Think with Your Soul. And the theme of the chapter is something called spiritual intelligence. As I explain in the book, this is a relatively new field situated somewhere in the overlap between neuroscience and psychology, and for some of us, theology as well. The neuroscientist Andrew Newberg, who specializes in brain scanning technology, he's scanned people of all sorts from different traditions and religions engaged in spiritual practices. So while they have been chanting, or meditating, or even speaking in tongues, actually, people from all different walks of the spiritual spectrum, he has scanned their brains to see what's going on in their heads as they, go through these practices, which is a really fascinating thing. And it's opened up a whole new area of study, which he calls neurotheology, which is, as I say, a cross between science and theology. And maybe we'll look a little bit more at his work later on sometime, because I think, what he's been doing and what he's been finding out is very, very interesting. But sufficient to say that he argues that the brain is hardwired, or seems to be hardwired, for spirituality, and that spiritual practices can and do actually change the structure of the brain in various ways. I'm afraid that all of this has rather passed the church by, which is sad, I think, because I believe there's a lot to be gained from the whole notion of spiritual intelligence and the insights that are emerging from the work of people like Andrew Newberg. Up until the mid-1980s, the only intelligence that we ever heard about was rational intelligence, measured on a scale of IQ. But then a guy called Howard Gardner in the mid-1980s hit on the liberating insight that there are multiple intelligences. And this is very, very helpful, I think, because for those of us who find the kind of rational IQ type intelligence to be a bit of a struggle, the fact is there are so many other intelligences that the human being has. And perhaps, I wish that was something that was more taken account of in education than it is. Included in the intelligences that he turned up were things like visual or spatial intelligence, linguistic intelligence, body intelligence. Some people are much more agile and can do things with their bodies that other people can't. A musical intelligence, another amazing sort of area, uh, but also emotional intelligence, which we hear quite a bit about these days. That really took off as an idea in the 1990s, and it's now embedded in the thinking of people in all kinds of areas of society, in business, for instance, where it is appreciated when trying to find new candidates to fill jobs, that the intelligence for processing emotions, one's own and other people's, is a crucial ingredient in any organization. You may be a genius, but if you can't get on in a team, then that might be, excuse me, not too helpful a thing. Of course, we already knew about emotions and relationships and stuff before all of that, but the concept of emotion, well, once you see the concept of emotional intelligence, excuse me, that provides a new framework, really, a useful framework to understand the whole area of emotions and human interrelations with respect to emotions, and to work with our emotions more, more productively and helpfully. In a similar way, the realization of spiritual intelligence in the late 1990s opened up a whole new field of understanding in itself. In the past, issues like ethics and wisdom, compassion and meaning to life, these were all the kind of things that were subsumed into the category of religion. But spiritual intelligence, as it is now called, um, gives a rationality to spirituality apart from as well as within religion. It opens it up into a more generic field, if you will. And this distinction has become more and more important and pressing um, due to a widespread disaffection with mainstream religion. For a very long time, and especially in the later half of the 20th century, confidence in religion has just been draining away on a massive scale. People turned away from church and church going religion in droves. This is going way back into, certainly into the 19th century, but especially as the 20th century wore on. And this is not least because religion became identified with rules and rule keeping, with dogma and archaic rituals, in a world that was opening up, in a world which was now a global village, and where perhaps many of the old certainties that the church could, stand on and, demand authority on the basis of, was really all just, disappearing away. We live in a very different world today. People are thinking in different ways, and so peddling the old certainties works for a few who still feel they want those certainties, but for most people, those certainties no longer ring true. Now, none of this meant that people became less spiritual or less concerned with spirituality in their lives. Indeed, the massive achievements of science and technology and the like, while making life much easier, less limited, nevertheless help to create a barren landscape for the soul. And there is considerable hunger, I believe, for greater meaning in life, for pathways through the minefields of technology, culture wars, and geopolitical tensions, all the stuff that's going on in our world. There is a desire for something that transcends all of these difficulties and challenges. And with established religion basically out of the window, and sometimes looking out of touch and silly, in fact, the question is where to turn. So it's helpful to realize that spirituality and religion are not automatically synonymous, and work from the worlds of neuroscience and psychology, as well as anthropology, point to the fact that spiritual intelligence is not a new invention, but represents the intrinsic human capacity and interest out of which religion emerged in the first place. So, in a way, spiritual intelligence is prior to religion. It is that hunger, that instinct to search, the curiosity to wonder why, which gave birth to the whole religious instinct, and generated religions all over the place as ways of exploring the very questions about existence and its meaning, which, as I say, were there long before. So the key focus of spiritual intelligence, you could say, to simplify it down, is why. Lots of other parts of our intelligence deals with what and how, but spiritual intelligence focuses on the question why, as it's digging down beneath the surface. Now, I should quickly say that none of this needs to be understood in a reductionist fashion that eliminates divinity, that eliminates God, or divine activity or divine revelation. The two are perfectly, potentially compatible. But the problem is that when, religion finds itself stuck in the mud of the past, then, there are people who reject all of that, but nevertheless demonstrate great levels of spiritual intelligence. And in fact, sometimes I think even the decision to dump religion may be, for some people, an act of spiritual intelligence, because they realize that all that is just about rules and a culture that is no longer applicable, and the hunger for transcendence shifts beyond that realm of religion. That's why I constantly say, just because someone wears a label, and that's all it is, of atheist, doesn't mean that they, have rejected God. They've rejected a concept of God, a construct of God, that has become prevalent in the church, which no longer fits in a scientific age. All in all, the point of me writing this chapter in the book is to say that churches and religion do not have a monopoly on spirituality. Indeed, it's possible to say that in some ways spirituality thrives more on the outside of organized religion in these days than it does within, which I feel very sad, because I am a Christian. I am a servant of the church, and I find it sad because I don't think it has to be this way. But let me play you a clip it's from a dinner conversation, which I find rather charming, where David Steindl-Rast, the wonderful Benedictine monk who I've introduced before in the shed, explains his understanding of religion and spirituality over a meal with Rabbi Lawrence Kushner and the TV host. And listen especially for his comparison of the stages of a volcanic eruption with the way that religion begins in a mystical Big Bang and then cools down to become encrusted, if you like. So yeah, have a listen to this.
That is a big topic. How do you get from spirituality, of which mysticism is sort of the core?
Yes.
Most people feel more comfortable when they speak about spirituality. How do you get from spirituality to all those religions that you see around? And my answer is inevitably.
Why, though? What is it?
Because if you have an experience like that, you can't help it. Your intellect wants to explain it somehow.
Right.
And so your intellect swoops down on this experience and what was that? You see? And before you know it, even if it's just your private doctrine, you have a doctrine. Doctrine is speaking about the ineffable. Originally, more in poetic language, because only poetic language is strong enough to carry that weight. But that would be myth. You see, you make a myth,
right.
Or then you interpret the myth, and so you get theology.
So did everybody start as mystics, and then religion rose?
The religion starts from mysticism. There's
Yep.
no other way to start the religion. But I compare this to a volcano that gushes forth. This Big Bang experience. And then the lava flows down, or the magma flows down on the sides of the mountain and cools off. And when it reaches the bottom, it's just rocks. You never guessed that there was fire in it. So after a couple of 100 years, or 2,000 years or more, what was once alive is dead rock. Doctrine becomes doctrinaire, morals become moralistic, ritual becomes ritualistic. What do we do with it? We have to push through this crust and go to the fire that's within it.
Wow, it's pretty good, isn't it? What a great explanation, and what a great metaphor of the volcanic, of how religion, begins in the sort of mystical, the mythical in the very best sense of the term, the spiritual. And then there is a demand, a natural demand to understand, to make sense of the mystery, out of which theology and doctrine and so on may emerge. But then, as he says, the doctrine becomes doctrinaire and the whole thing shifts down until that burning, molten fire, that out of which faith emerges, ends up being these kind of dead old rocks with no sense of fire or heat in them anymore. Fantastic way of seeing that process. And all of which links very well, I think, into chapter 5 of How to Be About Christian, which is called Wakey Wakey, How to Live Before You Die. Because a key factor in developing and strengthening spiritual intelligence is what you could call wakefulness, or in Buddhism, mindfulness, same thing. Throughout the Bible, there is this theme of waking up, awake, O sleeper. And it comes again and again that God is calling on people to wake up to all kinds of things. The prophets call people to wake up to the injustices that their society was in and their religion was inflicting upon people. Over and over again, there's this call of waking up. Because, it's so easy to basically sleepwalk through life or through religion, just shuffling along from one situation or one doctrine to the next without any connection with, things or reflection on what's going on with the heart of things beneath the surface. And the process, I think, of waking up is one of learning to stop, to pause in life along the way, to become aware of things, not just the outward things, that's important, what's going on around me, but what's going on beneath the surface, what's going on within me and within the lives of other people. And from that basis then to be able to take that insight, to take that connection on into the next circumstance, into the next set of events or the next things that are going on in our life. So it's basically at the core of it the capacity and the decision to pause more in life and not just go floating along. The way I sometimes see it is that it's a bit like an ice skater, that skating on the surface. And a lot of life and a lot of religion too is actually about skating around on the surface of things without realizing that there's a depth dimension as well to life. And as the great Paul Tillich said, it's in the depth dimension that we encounter God. And when there's that pause, that break in the sort of skating around, and we just comprehend the depth that is always there beneath us, the height that is always calling us out as well. Jesus himself, I think, can be seen as a man who was fully awake. I think that's one way you could characterize the life of Jesus. He was a man wide awake, walking around in a culture of slumber or doziness, And so he was awake to himself and to other people, awake to what was going on, awake to God in all of this, God in everything. And basically, he snapped his fingers at people. He shook them out of drowsiness. And we could see that as being a great deal of what Jesus did throughout his ministry. The way that the disciples would fall asleep, you've got those occasions like on the Mount of Transfiguration or in the Garden of Eden and other occasions. You could see that really as a metaphor for the way they and the rest of us so easily doze off whilst looking wide awake. It's sleepwalking is quite a good metaphor to see how many of us live spiritually sleepwalking. I love the quote from Frederick Buechner, which I gave in that chapter, who said, "Listen to your life," which sounds like a pretty straightforward thing. Listening to what you're feeling, which is unacknowledged, which you're suppressing or ignoring, what is calling you around you to pay attention, who is calling for you to pay attention. All of listen to your life. It sounds straightforward, but it's not. It's bloody hard, actually, and requires practice and work to bring ourselves back into the present moment, into this situation, and be awake to ourselves, to others, to what's going on, and in through all of that, awake to God. Sadly, many churches are sleepwalking their way into oblivion, just not hearing or responding to what's going on all around, and the fresh instincts that are calling us to move forward, to explore. There's so much nostalgia, and nostalgia is a massive form of sleepwalking, basically. And meanwhile, there is plenty of spiritual intelligence out there, people who see no sense in religion, in the leftovers of what was once burning volcanic fire, but now sleeps in dead rocks of dogma and ritual and attitudes that no longer fit. There are loads of people like that who, underneath the surface, have something of the volcanic fire going on there, or at least a hunger for it, but don't even believe for a moment that the church is somewhere, that what it is that they inarticulately experience can possibly be fulfilled. In the first chapter of my book, excuse me, I asked what difference it would make if we saw the word Christian as a verb instead of a noun, as a practice, something that we do rather than a club that we belong to or a set of propositions to believe. Well, so what if I said, my saying I'm a Christian means I adopt certain practices in my life, which as a Christian are deeply linked into the person of Jesus and to the faith that is associated with him, but which is to do not with beliefs about, it's not about a lot of propositions, but about a calling within to practice something, and isn't this really what James is saying when he says, show me your faith, I'll show you my faith by my works, by my actions. One of the key practices which I think Jesus was all about was the practice of staying awake to oneself and to the world. But as I say, practice involves work, effort. I mean, it doesn't just happen. It's no good me just setting an alarm to get up in the morning, and then switching it off and pulling the covers over, and which I'm quite good at. That's no good at all. I have to get up. I have to forsake my cozy bed, arise and get on with the day. That's work. That's practice. Spirituality is like that. It's practice, and with practice, things become more natural, more doable, less of an effort. Which brings me to chapter 6, dumping the guilt trip, forgiving ourselves and then moving on, because guilt can be like a spiritual sleeping pill. Guilt can put you to sleep. That might sound strange, but it does. It dulls the spiritual senses, lulls us into, if you like, an uneasy slumber. Why? Because strangely, it can feel like less effort to just live with the hum underneath the surface of guilt than to do something about it. Dealing with what makes us feel guilty may involve work and practice and deep discomfort, maybe even pain. But that's part of waking up. We've just finished, me and Pat, this amazing book called Midnight Library, recommended by Natasha, a faithful Shedster living in the States now. And it's such a good book. And it's about a person called Nora Seed, uh, who is hanging between life and death, who finds herself in this enormous library packed with books, each of which turns out to be a life that Nora might have lived if she'd made different choices. I mean, I won't spill the beans any more than that. Really, it's a frightening and mind-boggling thought, but it's a great read. But in the midst of these myriad stories on the shelves is one single volume that she comes across, which is large and heavy and grey, while all the other ones are green. And embossed on the cover of this book is the word regrets. And this is a book which contains a record of every single regret Nora has felt, from the monumental to the menial. It's all recorded there, and that becomes a key sort of feature in the way in which the rest of Midnight Library unfolds. I recommend it. It's quite a concept, but in fact, we all have actually, I think, an internal ledger of regrets and feelings of guilt. And maybe some of these are necessary regrets or feelings of guilt that become a source of suffering. Um, you know, maybe because we have indeed imposed suffering on others. Other regrets may well be invalid, things that we can and need to basically just turn the page on and move forward. But there are things, regrets and sensations of guilt which we need to attend to. Maybe write that letter or send that email, pick up the phone or pay a visit, own up to our actions, even if there is, some cost involved in doing that. And by the way, I think toward the end of that chapter, making the point that just because, the guilt is felt concerning someone who is no longer with us, in the case of that story, the father whose funeral I was about to take, doesn't mean to say that you cannot, still deal with that issue as if the person is there with you, because maybe in some sense they are. The thrust of the chapter is that God needs no persuading to forgive us. That's not the issue. The suffering is basically self-imposed, either because of holding on to feelings of guilt that we need to release, forgiving ourselves. I for years have said these words to people: God forgives you, forgive yourself. And I know that it's the forgive yourself that's the difficult, that's the troublesome bit. There's no problem with God forgiving. That's done. The Father had already forgiven his prodigal son as soon as he left. But the son had to turn round and come back into the heart of love in his Father. And in doing that, to find how to forgive himself. So that's often, where the rubber hits the road, as it were, for us. But here's the thing: living with guilt, whether it is like this huge din in our heads or a low-level hum, and a lot of people live with low-level guilt, it will, either way, strangle the spiritual life out of you. It puts you into a kind of coma. So, hey, there's a lot to think about there, isn't there, and to process. But one of the enormous benefits of Lent is that it's a prompt and an opportunity to focus on things that we've been avoiding, that we've been putting off. It's like a bit of a spring clean, really. Deal with things. Get rid of them. Move forward. That's what it's all about. So here's a prayer that I wrote about this. No regrets, God. I'm done with regretting. Don't get me wrong, there's plenty I would change if I had the chance. But regrets, they're so debilitating, so pointless, crippling emotions of despair. If I do regret, let it rather be a springboard into better choices, better outcomes, resulting in better versions of myself. Let me live in a state of grace, which is always in the present, never in the past or the future, but now. Help me grasp this moment right here, today, and dare to do the things that make my heart sing. No regrets. Amen. Excuse me. That, of course, is a prayer from my new book, OMG, A Bad Christian's Book of Prayers, which I'm launching this very week at the retreat that I'm leading at Amadown Retreat Centre in Somerset. And I'll say more about the book and about the launch of the book next week in the shed. It will be available as a paperback or a hardback in the usual ways on Amazon, and I'll be loading onto the coffee site where you'll be able to buy a signed copy if that kind of thing tickles your fancy. So very exciting week for me. And yeah, well, I'll tell you what, let's toast. Let's toast no regrets. A toast to doing our bit and then moving on. A toast to living in the present more and more as we move forward to life, l'chaim. Well, thank you very much for being with me in the shed here again this week. And if you like what I'm doing in the shed, you can support us. You can buy us a coffee by just following the link on the screen right now. And we appreciate your support in this way and many other ways so much. Thank you very much. I'm going to finish this week with a wonderful little video with Thich Nhat Hanh, wonderful Buddhist monk who died, was it last year? Sad day for the world. A man of huge spiritual intelligence. And he's talking here about God in a very mindful way. So I hope you enjoy this and, be blessed by it. Take it with you as you go forward through the week. Stay human, and I'll see you very soon. Bye-bye.
God is everything. Certainly, God is not an idea or a notion. God is very real, and you can get in touch with God if you are mindful, concentrated, and insightful. And if you have these three energies, surely you can get in touch with God. When you stop thinking, when you breathe in mindfully and enjoy breathing in, you can already get in touch with God. And you find out that breathing in is wonderful. As I breathe in, I know that I am alive. And to be alive is a wonderful thing. And as I breathe in, I become very alive. I see my body and my mind are wonderful. And I can get in touch with the sunshine, with the hills, with the sunflowers, with the water running from the water tap. And there are so many wonders of life in me and around me. And when I do walking meditation, I recognize that the path is filled of wonders. The grass, the tiny flowers, the insect, the sunshine, everything is a wonder. A pebble, a leaf, a flower, a butterfly, everything is a wonder. And I can see God in everything. You can see God in a pebble, in a piece of dust, in a butterfly, in a sunflower. You can see God in the other fellow. And if you see God like that, you are a happy person. You do not want to do any harm to yourself. And you do not want to do any harm to the other people. even if they are violent, even if they suffer because they have not been able to be in touch with God.